The shift happens without fanfare. Most people think this is about mining permits and environmental assessments. History suggests something far more consequential is unfolding in the Canadian Arctic. I watch as headlines reduce this to commodity prices and regional development. The public discourse frames it as another resource discovery, another chapter in Canada's extraction economy. Markets react with measured optimism. Analysts speak of diversification and economic opportunity. This comfortable narrative misses the fundamental restructuring that has already begun. What they discovered beneath the permafrost isn't just another deposit. According to early indicators, the rare earth concentrations found in the Mackenzie Delta exceed anything previously documented in North America. The preliminary surveys suggest reserves that could supply global battery production for decades without relying on current supply chains. But the real significance lies not in quantity, but in timing and control. I have observed how power transitions occur in the modern era. They don't announce themselves through declarations or summits. They manifest through quiet adjustments in dependency structures, through the gradual realization that alternatives exist where none existed before. Canada has inadvertently positioned itself at the center of the next energy infrastructure, not through strategy, but through geology. The current global energy framework operates on a simple premise. Those who control oil extraction control energy security. This system has defined international relations for over a century. Nations rise and fall based on their position within this hierarchy. But dependencies built over generations can shift within a single decade when the underlying resource changes. Draft assessments show that the minerals concentrated in these northern deposits are precisely those required for the next generation of energy storage systems. Lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements in combinations that eliminate the need for the complex international sourcing that currently defines battery manufacturing. When production scales, it doesn't just offer an alternative to oil-dependent systems, it makes them obsolete. I recognize the pattern because I have seen it before. The British Empire's naval supremacy didn't end with a defeat. It ended when oil-powered ships made coal irrelevant. The Dutch financial dominance didn't collapse through invasion. It shifted when trade routes moved away from Amsterdam's harbors. Power doesn't surrender, it becomes unnecessary. The implications extend beyond energy markets. The current geopolitical order revolves around choke points: the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, the pipelines that cross continents. These strategic locations derive their importance from oil's journey from extraction to consumption. When energy storage becomes localized, when power generation shifts to sources that don't require transport across oceans, these choke points lose their leverage. Canada finds itself holding the key to this transition without having sought it. The country that has historically positioned itself as a reliable supplier within existing systems now controls the materials that will define the replacement systems. This is not strategy. This is accident becoming advantage. I observe how other nations are responding. The initial reaction remains focused on securing access through traditional means: investment partnerships, trade agreements, diplomatic engagement. These approaches assume the current framework will absorb this new element. They fail to recognize that the framework itself is becoming redundant. The transformation operates on multiple timelines simultaneously. Markets respond within quarters, infrastructure adapts within years, geopolitical structures realign within decades. But the decision points are happening now, in boardrooms and government offices, where most participants believe they are making incremental adjustments to existing strategies. Unverified reports imply that several major economies are already developing contingency plans that assume oil's diminishing strategic importance. These aren't public policies. They are structural preparations for a reality where energy security no longer requires maintaining complex relationships with current oil-producing regions. The psychology of this transition reveals itself in the language being used. Officials speak of diversification and sustainability rather than replacement and obsolescence. They frame it as addition rather than substitution. This linguistic caution reflects an unwillingness to acknowledge that fundamental systems are changing, not evolving. I understand why this reluctance persists. The current order has created vast institutional investments in oil-dependent infrastructure. Financial systems, military strategies, diplomatic relationships, and economic theories all assume oil's continued centrality. Acknowledging its potential obsolescence requires admitting that these investments may become worthless. But markets don't operate on sentiment. They respond to efficiency and availability. When Canadian rare earth production reaches scale, when manufacturing costs for energy storage drop below oil equivalent pricing, when supply chains no longer require crossing multiple jurisdictions, the transition will accelerate, regardless of institutional preferences. The geographic implications are already becoming apparent. Regions that have derived power from oil reserves are beginning to recognize that their leverage depends on preventing alternatives from reaching market viability. This creates a timeline pressure that didn't exist before. Maintain relevance while the window remains open, or watch influence migrate northward to a country that has never sought energy superpower status. I note how Canada itself remains unprepared for this role. The country's institutions are designed for resource extraction within established global systems, not for managing the transition between systems. This institutional lag creates opportunities for other nations to shape how this resource reaches global markets. The current trend continues. If it does, we are witnessing the early stages of the largest energy transition since the shift from coal to oil. But unlike previous transitions, this one doesn't require decades of infrastructure development. The technology already exists. The demand is accelerating. The only missing element was secure, large-scale access to the necessary materials. That element is no longer missing. I watch as the institutional responses reveal the deeper psychology of power preservation. Central banks continue modeling energy security through oil price stability. Military strategists still calculate force projection based on fuel supply lines. Diplomatic corps maintain relationships built on hydrocarbon interdependence. These institutions function as if the foundational assumptions remain unchanged. But I have observed how technological shifts operate independently of institutional acknowledgement. The internet didn't wait for telecommunications regulators to understand its implications. Digital currencies didn't seek permission from central banking authorities. Market forces move faster than bureaucratic recognition, and bureaucratic recognition moves faster than institutional restructuring. The resistance patterns are becoming predictable. Existing energy powers will attempt to control Canadian extraction through investment and partnership agreements. They will offer infrastructure development, technological assistance, and market access guarantees. These offers assume that Canada will process this transition through established frameworks, rather than recognizing it as a pathway beyond those frameworks. According to early indicators, this approach misunderstands Canada's position. The country doesn't need to choose between old and new energy systems. It controls the materials that make the choice inevitable. When rare earth production reaches industrial scale, when battery costs drop below transportation fuel equivalents, when energy storage becomes more efficient than energy transport, the choice will make itself. I recognize the signs of a system that has reached its natural limits. Oil extraction requires increasingly complex technologies to access increasingly remote deposits. Transport infrastructure ages faster than replacement schedules allow. Environmental costs accumulate beyond economic absorption capacity. Political stability in extraction regions becomes more expensive to maintain. Meanwhile, the alternative path becomes clearer with each production milestone. Energy storage systems that operate for decades without fuel inputs. Power generation that functions independently of global supply chains. Manufacturing processes that eliminate the resource transportation bottlenecks that currently define energy economics. The timeline compression is already visible. Unverified reports imply that battery manufacturing costs have decreased by 40% in the past 18 months alone. If the current trend continues, grid-scale energy storage will cost less than equivalent oil-based power generation within the next 3 years. This isn't projection. This is mathematical progression based on existing data. The geopolitical map is being redrawn by engineers and geologists, not diplomats and generals. Countries that have structured their entire foreign policy around energy export relationships are beginning to understand that their leverage exists within a closing window. The urgency creates pressure for actions that reveal how dependent their power actually was on the absence of alternatives. I observe how this dependency structure has shaped not just economic relationships, but cognitive frameworks. Nations, corporations, and institutions have organized their thinking around the assumption that energy scarcity creates controllable choke points. When abundance replaces scarcity, when distribution becomes localized, when storage eliminates the need for constant supply, these choke points become irrelevant. The Canadian discovery doesn't just offer an alternative to oil, it eliminates the structural conditions that made oil-based power sustainable. This is not transition. This is replacement, occurring through obsolescence rather than competition. History doesn't turn back because it's misunderstood. The Canadian discovery has created a path away from oil dependency that cannot be closed through diplomatic pressure or market manipulation. When this reality is accepted, the current energy-based power structure will already have become a historical curiosity rather than a contemporary fact.